Entrepreneurship has a public version and a private version. And public is traction, momentum, and wins. And private happens to be uncertainty, responsibility, and the pressure of being the person everyone expects to be steady. And since I work in executive presence, especially for teams, I am always looking at one thing: how leaders show up when the stakes are real, not when it's rehearsed, when it's real. And if you've ever refreshed your bank account like it was going to give you clarity, I want to welcome you. You are in the right place. Welcome to Sip and Speak, the podcast for grounded, high level conversations about leadership, growth, and the real work behind building. I'm Samantha J. Best, and this episode, we're talking about entrepreneurship beyond the highlight reel: uncertainty, decision making under pressure, and the emotional discipline it takes to build for the long term. My guest is Rawle Annandsingh, an innovation ecosystem builder, founder, and venture capitalist working across Latin America and the Caribbean. He happens to be the director of Founder Institute Caribbean, founder and CEO of Exborder, and a venture capital fellow at VC Lab. Rawle, I want to welcome you to Sip and Speak.
Thank you very much, Samantha. It's such a pleasure and an honor to be on your podcast. Looking forward to this engaging conversation.
And we are so excited to have you. I really want to start off with how you earned this perspective, because you just didn't come into this through one straight path. You've lived in hospitality, advertising, and tech. And usually when someone has that range, it's because they've been studying people as much as business. So if you had to tell your career story through the lessons, maybe not the titles, what did each chapter teach you about people, pressure, and leadership?
Really good way to start to kick off the conversation, Samantha. Thank you. I think, as a founder, as an entrepreneur, and now as an innovation ecosystem builder and helping founders grow and scale, you know, reflecting on my own journey, it's rooted in my DNA. My dad was a founder. So growing up as a kid, you look up to your parents, you look at what they do, and a lot of what you learn, uh, it emanates from your parents, right? So during school vacations, we'll be working at my dad's automotive business. Um, so so having those lessons ingrained in you at such a young stage, it leaves an indelible mark, right? And and then as a young adult, you go off into the world and you try to find your own and make your own mark on the world. Um, but life tends to bring you full circle. So when I left home initially, I spent a year in Venezuela learning Spanish, and then I spent 7 years in Florida studying hospitality and working in hotels and restaurants. But when I returned home, I left all of that behind and became a serial entrepreneur. So my journey, I would say, started because of my dad. And to this day, it's just part of your DNA. It's part of who you are.
Okay, that is really awesome, and those industries really force you to build, let's say, instinct around human behavior. And founders don't, fail only from bad strategy. They do fail from sometimes misreading humans under pressure. So that will bring me to basically the present. People will hear ecosystem builder, and it sounds pretty abstract until you see what it actually means day to day. So when you zoom out, across your world, Founder, Institute Caribbean, Exborder, and even your VC work, what are you building in each lane? And what problem are you most obsessed with solving right now?
Yeah, that's a really good question as well, Sam. I think something that I share often is that it it takes a village to raise a child, and similarly, it takes a community to build a startup. And when we look at our local landscape here in Trinidad and Tobago, and even in the wider Caribbean, we found that most of our entrepreneurs have come out of maybe family businesses, and they get support from their parents whose business they're inheriting. But in more developed markets, the ecosystem produces entrepreneurs. So you're not dependent on your dad or your mom to hand you a business for you then to take that baton and run with it. The ecosystem is designed and built in such a way where studying entrepreneurship at school, you're learning engineering, you're learning sciences, um, you're exposed to the world of venture capital, you're meeting with other successful entrepreneurs, successful investors. So there's this ecosystem around you that allows you to not just launch, but allows you to learn and fail and then get up and try again. And it's easier to access the resources that you need, resources in terms of mentorship, market access, capital, incubator programs, accelerators. So about 3 years ago, in 2022, my then startup got accepted into Techstars, which is a global startup accelerator, and they invested 120,000 US into my business. But one of the first things that they asked me to do was to wind down my Trinidad and Tobago company and reincorporate as a Delaware C Corp in the US. And then when I graduated from the program, they encouraged me to apply for my O1 visa. So in other words, they were trying to take the talent out of the Caribbean and introduce the talent, inject that talent into the North American market. So if I use that as an example, what's going on now across the ecosystem, if that were to continue, is that our best and brightest minds will continue to leave our region because they're not accessing the resources at home. They have to, to go abroad to access the resources. So post Techstars, that sort of opened up my eyes a bit more in terms of, okay, you know, I came back home intentionally. I was living in Florida for 7 years. So I made a decision to return home. So this is where I want to be. This is where I want to build. And I think we have an abundance of talent. There's no shortage of brilliant founders here in the region. What can we do though, as a society, both public and private sector, to support these founders? And the missing components were, okay, giving them that framework where they can learn and fail and try again, giving them that those resources to access the mentorship that they need, to access markets, to be introduced to investors. So when you look at the ecosystem as a whole, all the stakeholders have a role to play if we are to truly innovate as a society and encourage more founders to build startups here.
Okay, that is absolutely amazing. So when I just want to go back to that offer that you mentioned. Did you accept?
Yes, so I did. So yeah, so my then startup, yeah, we were funded by Techstars, um, but I chose to return home. So I didn't remain in the US. So that was my choice. Um, and perhaps in hindsight, maybe not the best choice, because you need you need to be in a thriving community if you are to thrive, right? So we when when we look at children, we look at nature versus nurture. A brilliant child in a bad environment will struggle to fulfill their brilliance, right? But you could place a mediocre child in a brilliant environment, and that child will upskill. That child will excel and exceed. So oftentimes, for founders to achieve their full potential, they have to be around like-minded people, and they have to have the ability to walk into the neighborhood coffee shop and have conversations with other founders who are building like them, and to just walking down the side of the road to be bouncing into potential investors and igniting and sparking those conversations. I think all of that helps on the founder journey.
Right. So it definitely sounds like Founder Institute Caribbean is pretty much obsessed with spotlighting local regional talent. Could you just give me an idea of the process of how this works?
Yeah, sure. So um, the goal behind it was to create an environment in which founders with really good ideas, and I'll qualify good. Good means an idea that's scalable and that's potentially venture backable. And because it's inherently scalable and venture backable, a lot of the times it involves technology. Um, so we wanted to provide a framework within which founders could remain here in the region, access an accelerator like Founder Institute. We It's region wide because it's accessible virtually. So no one has to leave home. You're accessing it virtually. And then more importantly, when you graduate, you now have access to markets, to capital, to continued mentorship because you're part of a global thriving community.
It sounds really awesome. And now, correct me if I'm wrong, 'cause I wanted a little bit of clarity on X border. And I also want to make it concrete for the listeners and for the people watching this. Because cross border payments, that could sound pretty technical, but it's really about friction, trust, and time, if I'm correct. What's the human pain point you're solving with this? And what made you choose, am I correct, X border would be linked to tourism as the entry point?
Yes, yes. So as I mentioned earlier on, I've been a serial entrepreneur for most of my life. In 2024, both Andreessen Horowitz and Y Combinator published white papers around um, idea spaces that they would like to see founders building in 2025. One of those idea spaces was around stablecoin. Now, Sam, up until that point, so this is like November, December 2024, up until that point, I had never ventured into fintech. So I had no prior experience in that field at all. But being the inquisitive guy that I am, I dove headfirst, a lot of self-learning, um, and started to research what's going on in that space. What is stablecoin? Is it a crypto? Just understanding how it works. And technology aside, I went back to my roots. So I went back to my roots of, those early formative years in tourism and hospitality in Florida, and looking at, okay, how can this new technology provide a solution that the industry faces? And when I looked at online travel agents in particular, so most of them fall within the IATA framework. The IATA framework is the International Aviation Association. So when you look at those agents who are part of IATA, they have a really easy way to submit or remit payments to, let's say, airlines, because they're part of that ecosystem. But there's a huge market that exists outside of that. And these travel agents are still using traditional banking rails, meaning they go to their bank and they request to send an international wire transfer. So they're making these international wire transfers across borders to pay airlines, hotels, tour operators, transportation companies, etc. And those wire transfers oftentimes take 3 to 5 days to settle. It's costly. They're exposed to the FX volatility because you send a payment today, it doesn't arrive until 3 to 5 days from now. So the exchange rates could differ. Um, so when I look at all of that, stablecoin was uniquely positioned to solve those pain points. So using stablecoin which is a form of cryptocurrency, but it doesn't have or doesn't carry the risk of cryptos. So it's pegged in value one to one to a fiat currency. So it could be pegged one to one with the US dollar, for example. So it's actually a perfect form of payment because it's trusted in that if I give you one stable coin, you can redeem it for one US dollar. But it because it resides on the blockchain, it comes with all the benefits of the blockchain. So it could move up globally in seconds. It costs pennies on the dollar versus traditional banking fees. And then you can hedge against FX volatility. So you can keep your stable coin in your virtual account, and then you don't withdraw to your traditional bank account until you see the FX at a rate that's preferable to you, you know? So that's where I'm starting with Exporter. Of course, there are a lot of different use cases where stablecoin and those payment rails are concerned, but certainly tackling the tourism sector is the first protocol.
It's actually very interesting. I didn't realize that was like such a great exchange of forex happening there with the tourism, and you even looking at the aviation industry. So that's awesome. And yes, my brain has been actually ticking while you've been talking about, ooh, how can I use this stable coin?
Yeah.
As well for my own business. So we got into the foundations, all the technical parts that you are involved in, the products. Um, because if you want a true test of emotional regulation, you have to add, the money, the deadlines, and the borders, and those things kind of come at you all at once. And this is why I say executive present just happens to not be polish alone. It happens to be clarity under pressure. So now I want to go into the part founders rarely narrate because it's not marketable, because, it happens to be the real deal. And when you work this close to founders, you start seeing what they're carrying that nobody claps for. So talk to me, Rawle. What is the unseen emotional labor of entrepreneurship that founders rarely say out loud, because you have experience with so many?
Yeah, definitely, and I mean, looking at how we were raised, right? I mean, our parents encourage us to study hard, get a degree so you can get a job, right? It was never about study hard so you can start a business or study hard so you can become, an entrepreneur. It was always you should be a lawyer or a doctor or an engineer. Those were the fields that our parents encouraged us to pursue, because they're safe. So anyone who is sort of leaving that safety net behind and venturing into the world of entrepreneurship, they're already, just by thinking about it, they're taking a risk. And with risk comes a lot of sacrifice, emotional heartache, and sadly, often to a lack of support. And it starts with the people around you, you know? I have heard many times, Roll, why don't you just go get a job? You're continuing to struggle, you can't pay your bills, and why don't you just go get a job? Right? So people in your inner circle, even though they may share that with the best of intentions, it's received differently when you have a founder mindset. I can't change who I am. And most founders who have that mindset as well will never be happy at a desk working Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, because that's not who they are. Right. So it's a completely different mindset. So it's something that is really important as we nurture our community of founders, that we pay a lot of attention to their mental health and wellness, their overall well-being, to ensure that they have the support. So which is why mentorship is really important, because mentorship isn't just about, well, let me look at your financials and tell you if you're doing the right thing or not. No, 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 no. Mentorship is about, I have been in your shoes. You're crying right now, and I feel your pain. Sam, I'm sharing this, and I am getting emotional.
And I'm
So
getting choked up.
it's real, right? It happens every day. So to truly support founders, you need people who understand what it is to be in their shoes, not someone who has a 9 to 5 desk job and gets a big fat salary at the end of the month. No, you need someone who has walked that journey before, because what we tend to highlight online and in the media are the successes. We rarely hear about the failures, and it's the failures though that get us to the point of success. But as a society, we celebrate, you know, the road march winner, but we're not looking at how many songs he produced that never even got played on the radio, right? So it's the same thing for a founder. We go through those highs and lows, and it is an emotional roller coaster. So building that community, curated community, is so very important for the well-being of a founder.
Yeah, and I'm imagining that we've all gone through the decision fatigue, the identity pressure, the relationship strains, personal and business, the isolation, and the invisible job of staying regulated so that other people can feel safe, especially when you start to manage your teams, right? You go beyond yourself. How do we stay regulated and in that safe space for ourselves and don't get that burnout?
That's that's really important. So we emphasize that it's equally as important to ensure that you're getting sleep, that you're eating well, that you're exercising. So and again, I say this to emphasize that, for example, when I was growing up, it was all about work hard, work hard, work hard. So you leave school, and then your parents have you in lessons. And then you get home from lessons, you have a quick dinner, and then you have to study until midnight. And then it just goes on repeat. So it was always about study hard, work hard, sleep isn't important. You need to be up until hours in the morning, cram it for some exam. That's not sustainable. That's not healthy. It will lead to breakdown. It will lead to founder burnout. So that's not good at all. And there are things that we can do to create that time, because someone might ask, okay, so then how do you get all this work done? How do you achieve the success if you're not putting in 16 hours a day? Well, instead of spending hours on Netflix, cut that out. Instead of liming on a Friday or Saturday night with your friends in a bar, cut that out. So there's so many things that we do in our life right now that takes a lot of time. As a founder, you have to make those sacrifices. So you focus on getting enough sleep at night, you focus on exercising, you focus on eating well. And then apart from those three things, you should be working on your startup. Nothing else. As a founder, you rarely have time for a social life because you're building. You need to prioritize yourself first before you can start taking care of anyone else. So once you are okay, it's like when you're on a plane, if something happens and the mask drop, what do they advise you to do? Put on your mask first before you can assist the person next to you. So as a founder, you need to ensure that you are well and that you have sufficient time to take care of yourself and your business before you can do anything else. So it's really about putting on those blinders and being laser focused on your own well-being.
And I'm really curious here, as in, what do you think founders mistake for strength? Like, what are they performing that actually makes the load probably heavier for them?
I think there's a lot of maybe misconceptions about what entrepreneurship is really about. Um, I see a lot of young founders who consume a lot of content online, and they all think, well, hey, I could be a university student like Mark Zuckerberg and code an app, and all of a sudden I become a gazillionaire overnight. Doesn't work like that though, right? Like it just doesn't. So I think founders sometimes are coming in with the wrong intentions, meaning they're looking to get rich quick. And entrepreneurship is, if that's the purpose, then don't become an entrepreneur, because there is no get rich quick. You probably do better by studying, listening to your parents and getting that law degree or that medical degree, or become an engineer. At least, you can earn a decent salary. But the life of an entrepreneur, I mean, no way. It's years in the making, and a lot of sacrifice. So I think for founders, sometimes getting into it for the wrong reasons would lead to disappointments in the end. But if they're truly passionate about solving problems, building innovative solutions, and they have what it takes to take that idea to market, then the sky is the limit.
Awesome indeed. I was gonna say to Rawle, I was like, Rawle, this is not the sexiest pitch that you're doing to encourage the founders.
It's not
We all know that, but we need the reality so that we can be prepared and that we don't like say this is not what I was expecting and then give up when you're almost there, right?
on your point of sexiness. Let me just touch on that a little bit with some numbers, right? So I just graduated my first cohort at Founder Institute Caribbean. We received 93 applications from across the region. We enrolled 38, and only 17 graduated. So when you look at the numbers and what that data tells you, it tells you that out of 93 applicants, only 17 came out in the end. This isn't easy. So being an entrepreneur is very difficult, and it's, so to your point, it's definitely not sexy.
Now, we all know as entrepreneurs and founders that we can have the best week of our life. And then we could just be like that one email away from a spiral. And it's not about the drama, it just happens to be your environment. So I want to treat uncertainty like it's not a phase, it's the operating system. So, how does living inside constant uncertainty change the way a founder will make decisions? And then, how does it change the way that they're going to show up for their team if they're so lucky to have one?
Yeah. So I mean, as a starting point, one of the tools that we use, for example, in our application process for Founder Institute Caribbean, involves social science. So we've created an in-house entrepreneur DNA assessment. So, and the reason I bring that up is because it's really important to identify not if the idea is a good idea, because some ideas are dime a dozen, right? You pitch an idea to me, chances are somebody else is already doing that and doing it well. So I place zero value on the idea at the start. What's more important is identifying if this person in front of you has what it takes to be a founder, because we know how difficult it is. So that DNA assessment helps us to weed out applicants. So as a starting point, you as a founder have to have what it takes inside. Literally, it has to be part of your DNA, that mindset, to be a founder. And then secondly, even the best persons who are, strong-minded, strong-willed, and have everything what it takes, emotionally strong, they still need that support system. So in our accelerators, we break the founders into working groups. We encourage them to have their own little small communities using whichever platform they want to use, if it's WhatsApp or Slack. So it's important that when you're in the weeds and you're building and you're running into those brick walls and you can't see your way, that there's someone who's there in the trenches with you who could relate. Because sometimes all you need is for someone to tell you, hey, exactly what you're experiencing, boy. That happened to me last week, boy. So I totally understand where you're coming from. Maybe you should just take a break and go and take a run around the block or go see a movie, take your mind off it, and then come back to it. You need someone who is supportive and encouraging. What you don't need is for someone to say, you see, I tell you that too hard. Boy, go and study your books and go and get a job. You don't need people like that. You know?
And sometimes, leaders can lose their trust, not because they don't know, just but because they could lose coherence. Sometimes when I work with teams, a lot of people want stability. So we kind of focus on the structure that will give clarity. And we might get into here's what we know, here's what we don't know, here's what we are going to do next, and here's what we'll update. So, in your experience, what helps founders stay coherent without turning uncertainty into that panic and urgency addiction, if there's such a thing?
Yeah, good question, Sam. I think it boils down to celebrating the small wins. So if when you zoom out, we're there with a dream. We're like, all right, I want to launch a fintech and I want to become a unicorn in 5 years and be worth $1 gazillion, right? That's great. That's not gonna happen overnight. Oftentimes you fail, so it never materializes. But if you focus on smaller wins and say, hey, this week I want to talk to 10 customers, 10 potential customers, and I want to onboard one. And when that happens, you celebrate that win. Day after day, week after week, you're sort of building momentum, celebrating those small wins along the way that gets you to that end goal. When you realize that you're progressing, that sort of feeds your fuel. It energizes you to keep on going. And the magic behind it is that when you start collating and tracking that data now over time, if it's, let's say, your first week or the second week, the numbers don't really tell a story. But then when you zoom out over like a 3 to 6 month period, you're like, wow, look how far I've come from when I started in January. Now I have 100 customers on my platform. In January, I had none. And that was because every week I was talking to 10 and trying to onboard one or two. It comes down to just taking one day at a time, setting those goals and celebrating the small wins.
Yeah, that is definitely something. I mean, even for myself, that I have to keep in mind when you look at the bigger picture of where you've come, right? At some point, and just take the encouragement step by step. And even for me, sometimes I want to use the word anxiety, but I think the word is more urgency, and that could feel like control, and it could become part of your personality. I see you nodding your head. It's a thing that I've seen across leadership, right? Especially when you're a high performer. And it's that the pressure, it does eventually leak and it doesn't stay neatly inside your business. So what does founder uncertainty do to relationships? And I mean relationships with your co-founders, your partners, your family, your team. Where will it show up first?
The cracks start with the people who are around you. It's the people who know you best, who have access to you, that can either be your cheerleader or the one telling you to quit. And from what I have learned in life is that we automatically go to our friends and family when we're in difficult places. You need not to do that as a founder because your friends and family don't know what you're going through. You need to first go to your peers. You need to build that founder community and go to your peers instead. Approach your mentors. They're the ones who'll be able to sort of dig you out of the hole that you're in, the rut that you're in.
And you mentioned like the people closest to you, that circle. And as a founder, as an entrepreneur, sometimes you'll speak to your loved ones like you're giving that quarterly update. And you tend to always kind of be in that work mode. It's kind of hard to set those boundaries a lot of the time in the early days. And I don't know if you're going to agree with me, but I think boundaries are leadership infrastructure. So, what boundary do you think every early stage founder will need if they want to build long term without burning through their relationships?
Certainly, there are people that I just won't have entrepreneurship conversations with because they just don't get it, and it wouldn't bring any value bringing it into the conversation. So your loved one, that close friend or family member, isn't suited to help you fix anything, but they could certainly listen and just offer some encouraging words. But more than that, you need to build that community of mentors and peers who understand what you're going through, because then that empathy could also translate into actionable insights that you can then take to help you progress and move forward.
So that kind of brings me into what we might term self empathy. And still going to have your real obligations, your deadlines, your payroll, your pressure. And then you just can't take a break. So, how do you use this self empathy to get you from one stage of founder leadership to the next?
To answer your question, Sam, it's around what are you doing as a founder to reward yourself in small ways so that you're emotionally prepared to carry on. And again, everyone's different, right? Everyone perceives value and reward in different ways. Some people like money. Some people just want to go for a walk with a friend and just talk about it. Some people just need a hug. And for someone to say that'll be okay. So it starts with you as a founder being self-aware enough to reward yourself first in small ways. And those small ways become incrementally bigger as you progress on your founder journey.
Yeah, I did have some insights into a certain business sector, and they actually said they were aware of the huge responsibility that they gave themselves when they have staff, they have teams, and they have vendors. So whereas sometimes a solopreneur could say, you know what, this is not working out, I could just pack up shop and start over. When you've already established bigger ideas and bigger companies, you do have that responsibility. You're feeding families. You know that you're paying for school fees, not just for your children, but for your staff members. And that's something that keep a lot of founders going, actually,
Yeah.
than when
Yeah.
they're just focused on immediate teams,
Yeah.
you
Yeah. I
know?
mean, having that responsibility on your shoulder, it's a huge burden. Especially as you're now building and you don't have the resources to necessarily carry a team. So being a solo founder is so hard. Doing anything on your own is hard. So I prefer to build businesses with co-founders, with teams, and sort of share the responsibility, not have to carry it all on my own. But everyone is different. So ultimately you do what's best for you. But if you look at most successful businesses, it's not a one-man show. I mean, even Mark Zuckerberg in his very early days realized that he didn't have the executive level experience that he needed. So he hired talent. He hired talent who turned out to be mentors to him, and that helped him upskill, right? So that self-awareness is so important, Sam, especially in the early days of a young founder. They they need to realize, that, hey, I can't do this on my own, and it's okay to ask for help as well.
Right. And I want to talk context a little bit. So you're building in Latin America, we're building in the Caribbean, and that just is not about startup life. It's a different kind of constraint set. Sometimes it could be fewer buffers, longer timelines, and then there are higher consequences for mistakes. What do people outside our region misunderstand about building here, emotionally and maybe even structurally?
Folks in developed markets underestimate the ecosystems, or let me say that differently. They take for granted the ecosystems that they have, and they mistakenly assume that in developing countries similar ecosystems exist, right? So I'll give an example with Founder Institute. There are chapters. We have chapters in 100 plus countries, 200 plus cities, and I lead the Caribbean chapter. But there are chapters in developed markets that do very well financially because they have the support of a well-developed innovation ecosystem. So all the stakeholders are present. Laws, the regulations, the government policies are there to support innovation. Private sector stakeholders understand what innovation is and they invest in it. We don't yet have that in our region. We are still building it. We are still having to educate people on what innovation is. People think innovation is ChatGPT, and let me embed ChatGPT in my website, and that's innovation. That's not innovation, right? So we don't understand what innovation is. We don't understand how venture capital works. We think that if we give a founder a grant for $25,000, that somehow is going to equate to success. It doesn't work that way. So we are still in the process of building that ecosystem. And I'm happy to say though that at least since I got involved in innovation ecosystem development, so over the past 3 years, there's been a lot of progress. I am seeing the needle moving forward. And it's being largely driven by the development banks that operate in the region. So the Inter-American Development Bank, the Development Bank for Latin America and the Caribbean, which is CAF. So they are sort of taking the charge. They're getting governments involved, and they're rallying the ground troops in terms of the entrepreneurship support organizations who are actively working in these respective territories and getting all the ecosystem players together. Because going back to something that I shared earlier on, it takes a community to build a startup. No one person could do it on their own, because my founders coming out of Founding Institute can't succeed if we don't level up our venture capital game in the region. Because where they're going to get the funding from, right? So in other words, I can be doing this part, but we need other actors to also play their role. The government has to create policies that encourage startups to relocate here, to build innovative technologies that encourages venture capital. So government plays its role, banks play their role, and then entrepreneurship support organizations like Found Institute plays their role as well. And then collectively, we're now better positioned to support those startups.
what do founders actually need more of beyond the pitch practice and the strategy? Is that you mentioned before the only kind of support that can change outcomes, or are there additional ones?
There are additional ones, but I primarily work with early stage founders, and by that I mean founders who have nothing else but just an idea. They're perfect candidates, right? Um, I think we have a lot of educating to do in terms of what it actually means to be a founder, what does entrepreneurship mean, and sort of manage those expectations. I have had founders enroll in the accelerator who believe that on day one they should be talking to investors, and it's not because money is so important for them. It's because they just don't realize, well, hey, this is a journey, it's a process, and talking to investors at the start isn't the way you embark on this entrepreneurship journey that you're on, right? Um, so I think that's a good rule that local incubators play, a really good role that accelerators like mine play in the in the ecosystem, where we help founders understand from A to Z what is required to take an idea and launch it. Like, there's so much in between, right? We spend 14 weeks working with our founders, week after week, focusing on different foundational building blocks of their company. And when they graduate, they still aren't yet ready to talk to investors, meaning because you still have a lot still to do before you can have that investor conversation. So, um, I think that's the biggest part in terms of how are we educating people, ensuring that they aren't just getting their knowledge from from all these success stories that they see online, because you read all these stories, right? That, hey, this founder just raised $1.5 million for their startup. And we think, hey, I'll just come up with a brilliant idea and somebody's going to give me $1.5 million. And it really, really doesn't happen like that. I mean, even in my own case, with when I got into Techstars, it was because I had a failed startup. I had to pivot. I bootstrapped, built the product, took the product to market, got my first customers, was generating revenue. And that was the story that Techstars invested in. If I had gone to Techstars with just an idea, come on, anybody can have an idea, right? You have to show as a founder that you have what it takes to leverage your friends, your family, your own personal and professional network to get that idea to market. To get the idea to market, you still need now to build some traction. You need to show that someone is willing to purchase this product or service, that you can engage customers and they're willing to come on board and use your product or service. And it's that traction when you start to project the numbers over a period of time that investors will be interested in. Not when you're just starting out with an idea. So it's a journey, and a lot of founders don't understand how long that journey could be, and they want the money at the start, and it doesn't come like that.
All right. So I want to jump into a quick sip and speak round. Thank you for letting us know what we need to work on. Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. I hear you laughing. No, I just want you to give some short answers. High honesty. All right. So a founder belief that sounds ambitious but is actually dangerous.
Raising money on day one,
Boundary you wish founders would normalize.
asking for help,
The emotion founders avoid the most.
showing their failures, showing their sadness,
A
crying.
sen- Crying, okay. A sentence. Oh, I feel you do a lot of crying, Rawle. A, a sentence founders can borrow when they need help.
Wow, that's a tough one, Sam. You're putting me on the spot here. A sentence founders can borrow when they need help. Um, Keep it simple. I'm working on X. I can't seem to figure it out. Can you help me?
And a 10-minute practice that builds resilience.
Pitching in front of the mirror, practicing your 1 minute pitch, your 3 minute pitch, your 5 minute pitch in front of the mirror or in front of your friends and family, recording yourself on a video until you build that confidence. And I know, Sam, that you do a lot of workshops around that too. So
Definitely. So you see, that was easy, Rawle. That was a masterclass in just about 5 sentences. Thank you so much. The conversation that we have, it did give a lot of language to what so many people carry quietly, just letting us know about by speaking directly to the founder who's listening, who's carrying a lot right now. What do you want them to stop pretending about? And what do you want them to practice this week after listening to this podcast?
yeah, I would say that inherently founders, because I'm one and I know, are dreamers. So we have all these wild, grandiose, ambitious dreams, but they're often not grounded in reality. We need to come back down to earth and manage our expectations about what is it really going to take to accomplish our grand vision, to bring that vision to life. Um, so let's manage the expectations. Let's never stop learning. Graduating from high school or graduating from university isn't the end of learning. Learning is a continuous process where you have to always be learning. And now in the age of everything being available at your fingertips, there's absolutely no excuse why you can't continuously be upskilling. So don't be cocky in your knowledge. Be humble. Be open to feedback and criticism. Be open to being coached. Be open to even pivoting after receiving that feedback and realizing, okay, perhaps this idea isn't so great as I thought it would be. And lastly, don't be grounded in any one idea. A founder is who you are, it's part of your DNA. You can dream up a million ideas, right? So if one fails, start looking for another problem to solve, or be open to pivot or changing based on the market feedback.
That's awesome. So before we wrap, if someone listened, watched this, and thought, I needed that, and they want to stay connected to your work, where's the best place to find you, follow what you're building, and connect? It could be online through Founder Institute Caribbean.
Yeah, I mean, I'm active across most platforms, but more so on LinkedIn. So I think in the entrepreneurship space, LinkedIn is a really good place if you want to connect with me. But you can check me out on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. I'm on X. Um, but I would say start with LinkedIn. Send me a connection request on LinkedIn. Yeah.
And to everyone listening, presence is not pretending that you're just fine. Executive presence is clarity under pressure, boundaries that protect consistency and coherence, even while the story is still being written. If this episode gave you language for what you've been carrying, I want you to share it with one founder who needs it and follow Sip and Speak for more grounded conversations on leadership, growth, and how we actually sustain what we're building. Rawle, thank you for joining me on Sip and Speak. It was a great pleasure to have you, and thank you for all the intel.
It's my pleasure, Sam. Thank you for inviting me.
And if you lead a team or you're building while carrying a lot, I want you to save this episode and come back to it when you need clarity under pressure, and follow Sip and Speak for more conversations that strengthen how you show up, not just what you produce.